Exercise 49 is a review of Chapter 3, and it's also very similar to the inequalities that we're working with. Now, this is what we would consider a two-step equation. The only difference between a two-step equation and a two-step inequality is the symbol in the middle. So the equal sign makes it an equation, but if it had something like greater than, less than, then it would be an inequality. But the reason it's called a two-step equation is because you're going to need to do two things in order to solve for the variable. So, sorry about that bell. You're going to need to do two things in order to solve for the variable. I want to get the v by itself. So as you can see here, v is equal to what number? Well, the way we are going to determine that is by removing the numbers that are hanging around with the v. So that we would need to remove this 5 and need to remove this 6. Now, I want to remove that 6 first because v divided by 5 minus 6, I can simply just add 6 to both sides of that, and I'll get v divided by 5 is equal to 9. So I'll get the v by itself. And then following that, it just looks like a one-step equation. Now all we need to do is get a 5 on the top because there's already a 5 on the bottom. So we're going to multiply both sides by 5. And we get that v is equal to 45. So just those two steps here, step 1, those two steps get you to your answer, and you're going to be running into 4.4 here after 4.3, which involves a lot of two-step inequalities. That's actually all it involves. So just those two steps got you the answer. I needed to get rid of that 6 first. It's farthest from the v. It's still on the same side. So I added 6, and then after adding 6, I was left with v divided by 5 is equal to 9. Well, if v is being divided by 5, I can multiply by 5 to cancel out the 5s will equal 1. We don't show the 1. If I multiply by 5 on the left side, I'm going to multiply by 5 on the right side, and I get that v is equal to 45. Exercise 50 is another example of a two-step equation, but this requires that we do some distributive property first. So I've got 3 times the quantity of x minus 1 is equal to 18, and I want to show you two different ways of solving this. So the first way is what you're going to be more used to, is the distributive property. I'm going to choose a different color. I like this pink color. So we can distribute that 3 into the quantity, and that would be 3x minus 3 is equal to 18. And then following that, it becomes a two-step equation. We're going to need to get rid of both of those 3's, starting with the minus 3, and then after that changes our equation, we're going to then move on to the 3 times x and get that x by itself, and then put whatever x equals into our solution. Another way of doing this problem, though, is what I think is going to be the easier way, especially when you're dealing with fractions, is that this 3 times the quantity of x minus 1, that's why we distribute, is because we're multiplying. So this is 3 times the quantity of x minus 1 is equal to 18. Well, we've learned that if we have an equation or an inequality, and we have a number being multiplied by a quantity such as like x or y, then we can get rid of this 3 by dividing both sides by 3. Because 3 divided by 3, those will cancel out. Those can simplify into 1s, and that's just going to leave you with x minus 1. And we don't need the parentheses anymore because we got rid of the 3 on the outside of it. That's going to leave you with x minus 1 is equal to 6. And then after that, it's just a one-step inequality. I've got x minus 1. I'll simply just add 1 to both sides, and this becomes x equals 7. But I was able to do that by first getting rid of the number outside of the parentheses, and this comes really in handy when the number outside of the parentheses is a fraction. So let's say we had something like 2/3 times the quantity of 6x plus 2 is equal to 2. Well, instead of multiplying those 2/3 out to both of these numbers, instead I'll get rid of that 2/3 by multiplying it by its reciprocal. And as long as I do the same thing to the other side, then I'm following the rules for equations. I'm following the multiplication property of equations. These would cancel out to leave me with 6x plus 2. And then over on this side, these would cancel out and just leave me with 3. And then after that, I would simply just treat it like a two-step equation. And so that just becomes a lot more helpful when you're doing distributive property with fractions. You can just get rid of those fractions beforehand. And so hopefully I encourage you to practice that a few times on the 4.4 because you'll run into those. And rather than doing the fractions, it's easier to get rid of it first. And then lastly, exercise 52, just want to give you a reminder that you are going to need to find the lowest common denominator of both of these numbers before being able to add those numbers, and then whatever you choose as the lowest common denominator, that's going to change the numbers up top as well. But I have a pretty good feeling you'll be able to knock that one out real quickly.